Hi, how's it going? My name's Tarek, and today we're going to go over neurological development. So from about the time you're born until you're 2 years of age, your brain goes from being a fourth of its full adult size to 3/4 of its full adult size. And that's pretty incredible, actually. And if your brain kept growing like that into your, adolescence, your brain would be the size of a watermelon, and that would suck, for everybody. So it's really good for infants that their brain grows like that because it increases the amount of information that they can take in, which is obviously really important. And one of the biggest parts in your brain that is growing is called your cerebral cortex. And I didn't have a prop because of the coronavirus right now, but I drew one. And this is your brain. And so this big part right here is your cerebral cortex. You'll notice like a bunch of squiggles. That's just all I had at the moment. This is not anatomically correct, by the way. I just put that in there. Anyway, so this big portion is responsible for your memory, your perception, your thought, and all of your voluntary movement. Contrary to what you might believe, brain size isn't, it doesn't equate to capability. It does matter, but other things are, at play that make you good at things when you're a child. So, of course, your brain is growing, but also other things inside of your brain are growing at the same time, and they're growing concomitantly. And I learned that word today, and that means at the same time. So we're gonna go to the next guy for that.
Hi, I'm Jewel, and I'll be covering percentile scores. Percentile scores play a major role in infants' growth and development. It's a great way for doctors to keep track of their growth. Percentile score is actually defined as an amount of scores that meet or fall below a child's personal body measurement. So that's kind of like a child's weight, length, sometimes head circumference. In my opinion, I kind of look at it as a comparison of infants in a certain group. So in those groups that I just mentioned, height, weight, all that stuff. In the text, it actually describes the average newborn baby weight to be 6 pounds and length to be 19 inches. And those two measurements will be in the 95th percentile. Me, on the other hand, I was a premature baby and I weighed in at 1 pound 15 ounces and I was 13 1/4 inches in length. I think that will be in about the 5th to 10th percentile. So let's just talk about what those percentiles mean, like what the percents mean. So 95%, that percentile means that 95% of the time your data points will be below that value, and 5% of the time your data points will be above that value. So that kind of means that you're kind of on the front lines, you're kind of above average. And with the 5th percentile, it's the complete opposite. So 95% of the time your data points will be above, and 5% they will be below. So with 95 percentile, if you're in the 95th percentile, you'll see children that are like with weight, they'll be like 6 to 8 pounds at birth. But then with a 5 percentile, you'll see a child that's kind of like me, like 1.15 pounds. And 50th percentile is kind of like the median of the percentiles. You'll have the same amount of points above and below. It's kind of like the midway. But overall, percentile scores is just a great way for doctors to keep track of children, and it plays a major role into how you'll reach your major milestones like walking, crawling, all that good stuff when further developing.
So as everyone knows, infants are not able to do a lot of the things that older children are able to do, but they do have basic instinctual reflexes that are important for communication and are reactive to the environment around them. One of the reflexes is the sucking reflex, which is basically the baby sucks often, and whenever they have something in their hand, they want to put it in their mouth and suck on it. There's also the rooting reflex, which causes the baby to move towards whatever is put on their cheek, and both this reflex and the sucking reflex are important for feeding. There's also the grasping reflex, which is when something touches the baby's palm and it grasps around whatever the object is. That's why you see so often babies holding adults' fingers. They also have motor milestones that they experience. These aren't super specific. The baby kind of goes at their own pace, but typically around 12 weeks old, a baby will start to push themselves up once they've had a lot of practice with tummy time. About 4 to 5 months old is when the baby starts to sit up and roll over on its own. And then at about 9 months old is when the baby starts to crawl around or scoot around, or pull themselves up on objects to give them support on standing. And then at about 1 year old is when they start to walk around. But again, it's very hit or miss. They go at their own pace. Some babies do these things beforehand or afterhand, but it's really not super specific. But yeah.
Okay, so cognition broadly refers to mental activity. When you're thinking about cognition, you want to think of, say, attention, concentration, decision-making, memory, things like that. Well, in terms of an infant, most people don't think they're very cognitively active at all. More people would say that an infant is, per se, a perfect idiot. But in reality, infants are extremely cognitively active. When we think of the theorist that talks about cognition, we want to think of Piaget. He developed a theory of how cognition can change over time. In terms of infants are in the sensory motor stage, which suggests that infants are literally stumbling into experience, which means they must make sense of their environment and interact motorically with objects in order to develop schemas. And what a schema is an organized structure that can make sense of your environment or your motor experiences. Basically, a schema is developing neurological pathways associated with your motor movement. And what infants like to do is they like to repeat certain actions to further understand the concepts, you know? So an infant might pick up a pen and be like, and they would be like, well, why did it do that? So they'll pick up another pen and they'll drop it and see if it does the same thing initially to get an overall principle. So it would be, say, a dropping principle. And furthermore, they would keep doing this with other objects to form an organized rule. So you say, you pick the pen up, drop it, it falls. You pick tape up, you drop it, it falls. You pick the mouse up, drop it, it falls. They do this over and over again to develop these schemas so they can further understand their environment. That's the winner.
During infancy, when a child is exposed to a stimulus over and over again, they will become bored and disinterested in this stimulus. This is called habituation. The reverse is dishabituation, and is when an infant is introduced into a new object and the response is regained. For example, back to Coco Chanel, she's looking at the tree, and when the tree starts to sing, she starts to dance. And then she sees Bobo, and he is playing with another item, so Coco Chanel gets disinterested with that and goes into a new item. According to Piaget, infants are guided by two main schemas or trains of thought. The first is assimilation. Assimilation is when a person is already familiar with an experience or an object. The next is accommodation. Accommodation is when you're familiar with an object, but is put into a new environment, so you must adapt to that new event.